Days of this standoff this afternoon, an agreement was reached between Senate Republican and Democratic leaders to reopen the government, though only for 2.5 weeks. Here is what Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer agreed to. The federal government will reopen as soon as President Trump signs this bill into law. CHIP, the Children's Health Insurance Program, will be funded for 6 years. And now there is a commitment that the Senate will work on a big comprehensive bill, one bill that will attempt to lift defense and non-defense spending caps, address disaster aid, and undertake immigration issues, including DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program. But if no agreement on that big bill is reached by February 8th, Leader McConnell promised the Senate would immediately proceed to an open debate on immigration legislation in general, meaning that the bipartisan Gang of Six or anyone else can offer their own immigration legislation. Schumer's office says this commitment is more than the Democrats had before the government shutdown, but Republicans argue McConnell was going to do all of this anyway, and there's no guarantee as to what will pass the Senate or what the House of Representatives will do or what President Trump is willing to sign into law. Republicans say, frankly, the Democrats blinked. Republican Senator Cory Gardner, and someone whose life is caught up in these negotiations, a dreamer and activist who thinks the Democrats caved. But let's begin with CNN's Pamela Brown at the White House. And Pamela, President Trump, he obviously fancies himself a deal maker, but as far as we can tell, he's been absent from the negotiations and this deal. Is there any more clarity going forward on where President Trump stands on these major immigration issues?
Well, Jake, White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders said today that the president's position on immigration hasn't changed, that if anything, his positions have hardened. In fact, she stopped short of saying that he would support citizenship for the Dreamers. But she said the White House is hopeful a deal will get done in a couple of weeks, though the path to getting there remains murky. But for now, Jake, the White House claiming victory for stopping the government shutdown today, despite the president's backseat role in getting the deal done. The Senate striking a deal to bring an end to the 3-day-old government shutdown.
On this vote, the yeas are 81, the nays are 18.
The agreement funds the government through February 8th. And while it doesn't include a solution to DACA, it does come with a commitment from Republican leaders to negotiate a deal for Dreamers.
Let me be clear. This immigration debate will have a level playing field at the outset and an amendment process that is fair to all sides.
We expect that a bipartisan bill on DACA will receive fair consideration and an up or down vote on the floor. And we, on our side of the aisle, will continue to fight as strongly as we can for the Dreamers in the weeks ahead.
The deal clears the way for bipartisan talks to continue on DACA, the budget, and other priorities.
Today, we've taken a significant step forward with more than 80 senators voting to reopen government and with a commitment from the Republican leader to bring an immigration bill to the floor with ample opportunity for those with differing views to offer up substitutes to a bill.
The pressure is going to be on, basically, when we get our job done, then Paul Ryan has to do his job. We can't do the House's job.
Some Democrats expressed disappointment the party did not get a firm agreement from Republicans to take up a DACA bill. Others disagreed.
There's no way the Democrats caved. I think the Democrats got a better deal than people expected.
Despite reaching an accord, lawmakers were not quick to drop the finger pointing, with Republicans faulting Democrats.
It was a mistake for Chuck Schumer to shut down the government, 3 days of the Schumer shutdown. And I think we'll see more of this. The reason Chuck Schumer forced a shutdown is his far left base is enraged.
And while Democrats blame Republicans and singled out President Trump for being an unreliable negotiator.
President Trump's unwillingness to compromise caused the Trump shutdown and brought us to this moment. The facts are well known.
But the White House says the president is ready to talk.
Look, we've been very clear about what we want to see in any legislation, and I don't think that there's a whole lot of daylight between where we are and where the Democrats are. We certainly want to negotiate and get to a place, and we're hopeful that we can do that over the next couple of weeks.
It's still an open question today of how involved the president would be if a DACA deal passes through the Senate with getting the deal through House leadership with the House Republicans. That is still unclear whether he would be more involved than, of course, he has been this past weekend. And there's no guarantee, Jake, that we won't be right back to where we have been with another government shutdown in just a few weeks. Meantime, I should mention that Sarah Sanders also said the president will still be going to his trip to Davos later this week, assuming everything goes as planned today. Jake?
All right, Pamela Brown from her new perch at the White House. Good to see you there, Pam. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
And the Senate has just started its final vote to reopen the government. We'll keep tabs on that, but my political panel is here with me. Jen Psaki, did the Democrats blink?
Many think they did.
But what do you think?
No. Here's why. They're keeping the government open for 2.5 weeks. We're not losing or saving the republic here. If this was Democrats agreeing that you don't have to bring up immigration, nothing needs to happen, then I would say this is a terrible deal. But ultimately, what the Democrats get out of this, with control of nothing and really no leverage, let's be honest, is that DACA and immigration will be discussed for another couple of weeks instead of other issues like infrastructure that Republicans may want to discuss. And it keeps this issue on the front burner. It's not ideal. It is divisive within the party because progressives are upset, Dreamers are upset, as you've acknowledged. And that's not a good place for the party to be in. But ultimately, we keep an issue alive. Democrats keep an issue alive, and that's not a total loss.
I think a reasonable and cynical person could look at this situation and ask, did the Democrats want to flex their muscle to appease their base and stage a weekend government shutdown to ruin Donald Trump's one-year anniversary, ruin a fundraiser, and then take it back on Monday morning because they couldn't deal with the political consequences?
A cynical person might do that.
Not and I am that
not
cynical
you. Oh, you are.
reasonable
Okay,
person,
you are that cynical person.
And that is my conclusion of the situation.
You think that's what they did? Do you think the Democrats got anything out of this deal?
Not really. I mean, I think there was going to be a vote eventually on DACA, I think, and I suspect anyway. And the problem to me is a Senate vote doesn't get you anywhere. I think we sort of know the Senate is where it's likely to pass. The key question is, will the House have a vote on a bill any Democrats can actually vote for? And what will President Trump do? And I don't think Paul Ryan or Trump moved at all this weekend, even if Mitch McConnell moved a little bit.
So Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, a Democrat from New York, who it's no secret is thinking about running for president in 2020, she voted no today. You noted the progressives that were opposed to this on the bill. Here's what she wrote on Twitter, quote, "I am deeply disappointed that today's outcome fails to protect dreamers. They deserve better from the elected leaders of the only country many of them have ever called home. I want to see the government reopen as much as anyone, but this bill fails to fix the moral issue we must solve. That's why I voted against it." What happened today is dividing the Democratic Party, but I think it's also true that this debate going forward on immigration will also divide the Republican Party.
That's right. It's divided the Democratic Party today. I disagree with what Amanda said, no surprise, because this is really a moral issue for most Democrats. It's not a political issue for most of them. They think that this is totally wrong, that nothing has happened with the Dreamers, that there's 800,000 people hanging in the balance. However, what you're seeing here is bad for Democrats today. It will not be great for Republicans over the next couple of weeks. This is an issue that 90% of the public supports. And they're going to have to be on the other side of it or vote for it. And what's Trump going to do? So there's confusing dynamics there as well.
I mean, no surprise. I disagree. I actually think this has hardened the Republican position on it and messaged it more clearly to the public what the ultimate deal will be. There is a deal to be had on the table, protection for the Dreamers in exchange for the wall, lottery, reducing the lotteries and restricting chain migration. That's the deal to be had. But now that we've gone through this shutdown theater debacle, the White House is saying, you know, we're not even going to touch the Durbin deal with Graham. Like, that was a more liberal position, and Republicans are running away from it as a result of the silly, stupid shutdown. Well,
in addition to the White House saying today, Perry, that they do not support the Gang of Six bill, Durbin, Graham, the Trump campaign put a web ad out over the weekend that was pretty stark, pretty harsh. Take a listen.
President Trump is right. Build the wall. Deport criminals. Stop illegal immigration now. Democrats who stand in our way will be complicit in every murder committed by illegal immigrants.
Complicit in every murder committed by illegal immigrants. That does not sound like the ad of somebody who is preparing to sign a bill that will provide some sort of legal status for Dreamers.
That's been my core question throughout this. Donald Trump ran this campaign talking about illegal immigration. Does Donald Trump actually want to stand up any day ever and sign a bill that is going to be, no matter what he says, amnesty? I'm not totally sure he does. That ad I find worrisome for other reasons too. It's just we don't necessarily want to have one party that's the party for minorities and one party that's a party for white people. And if you think about that kind of ad, that's kind of where we're headed with that kind of messaging and how aggressive it was and how it focused on illegal immigrants being sort of bad and murderous. I think was a term really used in the ad.
I don't know that there's anything that can pass the Senate, meaning have 9 Democratic votes and all Republican votes, that doesn't have something for Dreamers. And yet, Amanda, you would agree that doesn't sound like
I think that ad steps on the strong hand that the White House has. No one is talking about not deporting criminal illegal aliens. That is not what this debate is about. The way that I think they have a winning argument is saying, listen, the Democrats shut down the government, defunded the military, put people on notice for this small population of people. And I think there is strong support for doing something for the Dreamers, but the Democrats are going to have to come to the table with other items. And until they do, there will be no deal.
Nobody defunded the military, first of all, so let's be just totally clear on that. But ultimately, this issue of DACA is one that 80%, more than that, of the public supports. Many Republicans who are in the mainstream support DACA. And so this isn't just such an easy issue, I think, to run away from. And the White House, and whether or not Trump is going to stand by his convictions, we have no idea what his convictions are. So that's another thing that we learned from this as well.
Everyone stay right there. I want to bring in Senator Cory Gardner, Republican of Colorado. He's on the Gang of Six. That is the bipartisan group working on an immigration deal. Senator, always good to see you. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate it. So first question, there's going to be a vote one way or another on immigration in the Senate. Does the Gang of Six framework have 60 votes?
Look, the framework is set by the president. The fact is he wants to talk about the things that we talked about in our bill. If that bill were brought up today, it'd be tough to have the support that we need. But the fact is this. I believe we can build on that framework. The 4 things the president laid out, the wall, addressing DACA population dreamers, addressing the diversity visa lottery, addressing the issue of chain migration, as the president calls it. Look, when the president said that he opposed our legislation, we didn't throw up our hands. We went back to work, talking to more colleagues about how we can improve it, what we can do better. Those are the same conversations we're having today.
So the president's spokesman, Raj Shah, told CNN today that the president will not sign the Gang of Six deal on immigration. Obviously, that has an impact on whether or not it will pass. I hear you saying it can't get 60 votes today. Last week, Durbin and Graham said that it would get 60 or 70. What do you need to do to get to 60 votes? What do you need to? Obviously, that has an impact on whether or not it will pass. I hear you saying it can't get 60 votes today. Last week, Durbin and Graham said that it would get 60 or 70. What do you need to do to get to 60 votes? What do you need to change in the bill?
I think we have to address the issue of the border wall system the president talked about, border security. That's going to be part of it. When we came up with a bipartisan bill, we knew that we'd have to convince our colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support it. If there's things that need to improve it to gain the president's support, that's what we have to
passed is usually it's 40-something Democratic votes and, as you note, 15, 20 Republican votes. You seem to be saying that the bill needs to have more Republican votes than Democratic votes. Am I hearing you correctly?
Yeah, the Senate doesn't make laws by itself. It takes the House of Representatives and President Trump, the White House. And so a bill that passes without the kind of support it needs to get through the House is a non-starter. We can pat ourselves on the back all day long for passing a bill out of the Senate, but nobody's going to give us a passing grade if we don't get it through the House, the Senate, and the President. That's what we have to do.
So what do you need to put in a, let's say, largely conservative immigration bill, so it would have more border wall funding, not just authorized, but actually appropriated, changing diversity visas in immigration, changing what are called either chain migration or family reunification visas. In addition to that, you would need to do something for the Dreamers in order to get the 10 or so Democratic votes, wouldn't you?
Well, if you look at the original DREAM Act, it had a 5-year path to citizenship. The final product that was negotiated, that was rejected, moved to as long as a 12-year path. That's something that we can negotiate. That's something that people are going to have difference of opinions on. The language that we came up with gave the president what he was asking for in his 2018 appropriations request. Obviously, people want more than that. We can agree to that. I just left a bipartisan meeting where we had people from all sides of the political spectrum there, from conservative to liberal Democrats, and talking about how we can actually use this chance to negotiate things like that. We have 2.5 weeks. This is not going to be easy, but I believe we can get the basis of the cornerstone of a very good deal laid down so that we can actually show results come February 8th.
Senator Gardner, I know you saw the web ad that President Trump's campaign ran, accusing Senate Democrats of being, quote, complicit in murders committed by undocumented immigrants. And I wonder if those are the actions of somebody prepared to sign any compromise legislation at all.
Look, the charges against that kind of language come from the same people who accused us of murder when we passed a tax bill. They said it was Armageddon, the end of the world. This is the kind of political rhetoric Washington, D.C. has come to be expected out of Washington, D.C. that the American people don't like. And so let's use this chance to have our better angels prevail on a piece of legislation that addresses a solution that I believe almost every member of Congress wants to address. The president has never, look, in my conversations with the president, he has never wavered on his desire to find a solution. He laid out the four corners of the deal that we have to address. He's been very clear about that. So let's take this chance. Let's put aside the rhetoric. Let's put aside the attacks, and let's get something done.
Senator Cory Gardner, Republican of Colorado. Always good to see you, sir. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Jake.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.
So I want to play for you some sound from Senator Lindsey Graham. He was talking about the difficulty that Republicans like he and Cory Gardner face when it comes to dealing with this because of staff members at the White House. Take a listen.
His heart is right on this issue. I think he's got a good understanding of what will sell. And every time we have a proposal, it is only yanked back by staff members.
No, I don't know if he's referring to Stephen Miller or General Kelly or whomever, but there does seem to be this issue about what exactly will the president support. Amanda.
Well, I kind of see both sides of this. I think the president has been pretty clear about what he wants in exchange for some kind of DACA protection. But at the same time, I don't know why these Republicans on Capitol Hill keep expecting to get permission from the White House on what they will pass. I mean, they got through the government shutdown with little help from him. I mean, when is the Senate going to start acting like the Senate and the House start acting like the House when Republicans run it and just pass some bills and send it to the desk and say, if you don't like it, veto it?
Do you agree?
I think it's a fair point. I mean, they do punt quite a bit and say, we don't know what Trump will support. Now, that's a frustrating position to be in, because if you look at the Durbin-Graham meeting, they thought they had a deal, and they thought they were going there to have a deal agreed to. And what we've learned about Trump over the last week or so is he's not steeped in the issues, no surprise. So he probably relies, as a result, on his staff too much, people who have very conservative views on issues like immigration, and he's able to be rolled by them. And so it's understandable they have concern, but Amanda's right. They could test this proposition, come up with a Gang of Six agreement, come up with an agreement people can get to, and see if he'll sign it or not. I mean, maybe the women that does.
Let me play devil's advocate. Let me pretend to be a member of the Gang of Six. Yep. Okay? Last week, Dick Durbin and Lindsey Graham said they thought they had 60 to 70 votes for their legislation. Today, you heard Cory Gardner tell me he doesn't even think he could get to 60. And what's changed? President Trump came out against it. There are a number of Republican senators, Perry, that I think will not support anything if President Trump says no for any number of reasons, including I don't want the president attacking me as being weak on immigration.
Exactly. This idea that Graham is talking about the staff, it's not a rogue staff. Donald Trump hired Stephen Miller. He hired John Kelly. These people are speaking and have these jobs because of him. And the White House actually has endorsed one bill, the House Goodlatte bill, which is a very conservative one the Democrats don't like. So we know where he stands. People don't like it, though.
Everyone stick around. We've got lots more to talk about as the Senate holds its final vote to reopen the government. Many immigrant communities say they've lost trust in Congress, especially Democrats. We're going to talk to one Latino activist who's also a dreamer. Coming up next. Stay with us. Back with our politics lead. You're looking right now at live shots from the U.S. Senate as they vote to reopen the government. Senate Democrats and Republicans reached an agreement earlier this afternoon, and the Senate's holding its final vote on that now. The government will reopen after that legislation gets to President Trump's desk. But the fate of the approximately 700,000 so-called dreamers who were brought to the U.S. illegally when they were children through no fault of their own, that remains in limbo. That was, of course, the major issue for Democrats in this standoff. March 5th is the deadline to negotiate a legislative fix, but it's unclear what the White House is willing to support. Joining me now is Juan Escalante. He's a dreamer. He was brought to the U.S. at age 11 with his brothers from Venezuela. He's now the communications director for America's Voice. It's a progressive group that advocates for legal status for undocumented immigrants. Juan, thanks so much for joining us. So simply put, you think Democrats failed today to protect you and your fellow Dreamers?
I think so. I think that they had a really strong negotiating position in which they could carve out a deal that essentially protected as much of the immigrant population, specifically the Dreamers, and in good faith also coming with Republicans. Unfortunately, what we see here now is that the Democrats have ceded way, and we still have until March 5th, as you mentioned earlier. But unfortunately, what's going to happen now is that the Senate may actually have a timetable to deal with this issue. But what about the House? What has Speaker Ryan promised, and what is going to happen in that scenario? What are the restrictionists from the Republican Party going to do and put forward? And more importantly, what ultimately is the president going to do? And, you know, way before the March 5th deadline, I think what is really at hand right now is one thing. Every day that Congress fails to act in passing legislation protecting Dreamers, 122 young people lose their status. And, you know, working as long as I have, this is my third DREAM Act fight, actually, over the past 10 years. You can see the effects of that right now. In Pennsylvania, a young man was pulled over. His DACA expired, wasn't able to renew because of the arbitrary deadline set up by the president. Pulled over by police for an expired registration, turned over to a detention center, and processed for deportation. And you can bet that from here until March 5th, we're going to see more of those cases.
Well, let me ask you a question. Sometimes we do this with President Trump. Why don't you do this with Chuck Schumer? What do you want to, I don't know which camera you should look at. Look at that camera right there. What do you want to tell him?
I think, you know, my message to Chuck Schumer is pretty simple. You know, we got to this point. What happened? Why did the Democratic Party have to blink first? And to me, there's just no reason, you know, as to why this has to happen. I've been fighting this since I was a junior in high school, when I was 17 years old. I've seen the DREAM Act fail twice in my life. And I told myself that, you know, this time I was going to go all in. I moved to Washington, D.C. I've met with members of Congress. I met with Chuck Schumer and, all kind of leadership from both parties. And at the end of the day, here we are again. And the can has been kicked down the road. First, it was in September. Then it was in December when the fix was going to happen. Then it was in January. Now we're being told in February. Before you know, we're going to get to March. And who knows what kind of deal we'll have.
Do you think that this will cause Democrats, especially Latino Democrats perhaps, to not turn out to vote in November for Democrats in the House and Senate elections?
I think what we've learned thus far is that elections have consequences. And what happens when people don't vote and don't show up to vote for their representative, whether they believe on one party or the other, there will be consequences. And we are essentially the main people that are the front line, and vivid examples as to what is happening right now. The next time a deal is cut on DACA, we have no idea what Stephen Miller, what Tom Cotton, or the rest of the Republican Party may try to inject in there in order to make sure that it's so toxic that the Democrats will have to be and say, we still want to save this pool of individuals. We'll cave to it. But when I look past that, I got to tell you something. I still care about my parents. You know, my parents brought me here. They got in line. They paid the fees. They did everything right. And because of an immigration lawyer that failed us, that mixed up our paperwork, we fell out of line, and my parents live still to this day. They own their own business. They pay their taxes. They deserve a chance too. And whatever deal is cut, you can bet that the president and his aides to the White House and the Republican Party are going to try every single thing to try to pull my parents away from
me. All right, Juan Escalante, thanks for being here. We really appreciate your time. Thanks so much. My panel is back with me. There's some breaking news right now. The White House said that President Trump met with 6 Republican senators this afternoon to talk about immigration reform. Those senators are Cotton and Cornyn, Grassley, Langford, Tillis, and Perdue. The White House released a statement about this meeting saying, quote, "We will work with Democrats and Republicans in the House and Senate, committed to fixing our broken immigration system." But I have to say, Jen Psaki, those are hardliners. Cotton, Perdue want to reduce the number of legal immigrants coming into this country. And if the president... Those are hardliners. Cotton, Perdue want to reduce the number of legal immigrants coming into this country. And if the president is casting his lot with people who refer to the Dreamers as illegal immigrants and refer to any sort of path to legal status for the Dreamers as amnesty, I don't know how you pass a bill in the Senate.
Well, it's certainly not going to be the bill that those 6 are proposing. Trump
how immigration is done, but I don't know that the two sides can come together.
I mean, that has to be where this goes. And it's unfortunate that DACA people are being used as leverage, but that is the exact situation that is happening right now. Donald Trump and the Republicans are using that population of people as leverage to finally get a solution so they don't have to come back and have this debate again about amnesty in 10 or 15 years. And I think that is a reasonable position, although it is hard to swallow. I think the good news for someone like Juan and his family is that I do believe Donald Trump wants to be the person that fixes this problem rather than being the president that deports people like Juan. And he delayed this action. I mean, it's called deferred action for a reason. It is a form of amnesty that these people are being given. And I think that calling it that actually helps negotiations and the messages the fact that Republicans are giving a certain kind of amnesty to this small, select type of person. And that can pave the way for other things. But, you know, Donald Trump issued a waiver once already. If there's productive negotiations going on, I have no doubt in my mind he would issue another waiver rather than deport people like Juan.
Juan brought up his parents, and I think it's a very important part of this is that it seems to me the Republican hardliners, as we're calling them, want to narrow this down to only the children. The children are the good people. Everyone else was a criminal and violated the law. And if you narrow it down that carefully, that's where a big part of this policy debate is really about. Is it only for dreamers? Can we limit legal immigration or can we not? And I think that's the issue here. I think the wall is not really the issue anymore. DACA is not the issue anymore. The real issue is, do we want to have fewer legal immigrants or more, or drop that number down, or keep that number the same, or increase that number? And that's where we're headed, is a real debate about what should the new immigration population look like? Should it be smaller? Who should be in it? And that's kind of where that's where the real divide is. Increase that number.
Right of center Democrats is why people don't believe the Democratic Party stands for anything. Your reaction?
Well, this reminds me a lot of the healthcare debate in 2009 and 2010, when a lot of people in the progressive community were frustrated that there wasn't a single payer option.
Or a government option.
Or
also,
a government option. Ultimately, elections, and I heard Juan say this, are about consequences. The consequences here are Democrats control nothing. If Democrats controlled something, we'd have more leverage, and probably DACA would have already been passed or would have been farther down the line. So I would say to Juan, you know, his story is why this is such an emotional issue that is going to drive people and probably drive more than just Latinos to the polls. But it is about a choice between parties, and that's where the Democrats can still redeem themselves on this front over the next few months.
We were just told that President Trump, in addition to meeting with the 6 conservative Republican senators, also met with Doug Jones, the new senator from Alabama, Democrat, and Joe Manchin from West Virginia. 2 Democrats, I would imagine, are trying to find some sort of compromise legislation. But maybe, as Cory Gardner was suggesting, the path is not to have 40 Democrats and 20 Republicans pass a bill, but to have 45 Republicans and then the Doug Joneses and Joe Manchins of the world support something.
Yeah, and I think this is really good news. But at some point, I think immigration has been such a political football that people on both sides of the aisle have kept it going for their political base. It takes some guts for someone like Joe Manchin and Doug Jones to say, hey, I'm willing to talk about it, because for far too long, and there's problems on the Republican side too, but focusing on the Democrats, they have said, we will get everything, we will get amnesty for all, or we're not talking, and that position is no longer tenable. And I think those two realize it.
All right, I want to, right now, I want to bring in from the White House, Deputy Press Secretary Hogan Gidley from the Trump administration of the Trump White House. Hogan, good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, great to see you, Jake. Thanks for the time.
So the clock's ticking, and the big question on the Hill right now as we go forward is, what immigration bill would President Trump be willing to sign? We keep hearing from Republicans that they really have no idea. Take a listen.
I'm looking for something that President Trump supports, and he's not yet indicated what measure he's willing to sign.
I prefer clarity, but we're not seeing that from the White House, and that does to some degree make our jobs more difficult here on Capitol Hill.
I've talked with the president. His heart is right on this issue. I think he's got a good understanding of what will sell, and every time we have a proposal, it is only yanked back by staff members.
So that was Mitch McConnell, Mo Brooks, and Lindsey Graham, Hogan. I guess the question going forward is President Trump willing to convey clearly what compromises he's willing to make on this, and what exactly he's willing to sign into law?
Sure. Well, I'm not going to negotiate from this live location, but I will make this point. You'll remember back in September, the president released a 7-page plan. It got windowed down to 3 pages. Your cameras had a front row seat for a 55-minute bicameral, bipartisan meeting in the cabinet room. After y'all left, they came out of that meeting with 4 narrow topics. all around the issue of national security and how we protect our borders. Number one in that was border security with a wall. Number two was ending chain migration. Number three was the visa lottery. And fourth was a lasting long-term solution to the DACA issue. That's where he wants to start the negotiation, and that's where we've got to be if there's going to be any deal signed.
So I hear you, and that was it was great television 2 weeks ago with the 55 minutes. But then Lindsey Graham and Dick Durbin thought that they were bringing President Trump exactly that, at least a starting off point with those 4 items addressed. And obviously President Trump said no, even though he also had said in that 55-minute televised meeting, I'm willing to take the heat, bring me a compromise, I'll sign it. So there obviously remains some confusion about what the president is willing to sign. Is he willing to sign anything that contains a path to legal status for the Dreamers?
Let me address the Durbin-Graham piece for just a moment. That's just simply not true. Senator Graham and Senator Durbin called the president and told them they had a bipartisan bill. They'd come together with some meeting of the minds to prepare a piece of legislation that would address everything the president outlined. The president was ecstatic. However, here's the problem. Senator Graham and Senator Durbin were completely dishonest. When they brought the plan to the president, it did not do anything to address chain migration. In fact, it blew it up and made it bigger. It gave basically amnesty, and then it didn't even touch but 1/10 of what the president, what DHS demanded this country needs. Not what it wants, but what it needs for a border wall. It was 10%. It was woefully underfunded. So the idea, and back to Graham and Durbin for a moment, to pretend for a moment they had to get together and have a meeting of the minds so they could come together on immigration. Those two have been in lockstep on immigration for decades. They want open borders. They want amnesty. That's what Lindsey Graham is about. I'm from South Carolina. I've known the man for a long time. And it's fine. He can take that position. But to pretend he's anything other than someone who wants open borders and amnesty is just disingenuous.
Well, I'm sure that both Dick Durbin and Lindsey Graham would take issue with your characterization. But in the time we have left, I just want to double back on the question I asked, which is President Trump willing to sign into law anything? Let's posit right now that it contains lots of border wall funding, not just authorized but appropriated. Let's posit that it changes immigration policy so that chain migration or family reunification is reduced and skills is increased, et cetera. But it also includes a path to legal status for the Dreamers. Something like that is, if it contains the path to legal status for Dreamers, would he be willing to sign it?
That was a lot of hypotheticals you just threw out there, Jake. But let's pretend for a moment that the 3 pieces are there, and let's focus mainly on DACA. The president has been clear that he wants a long-term lasting solution. He's willing to have the conversation. He's willing to negotiate. We know what some Democrats want. We know what some Republicans want. But anything that relates to DACA, whether it be a pathway to legalization, a pathway to citizenship, that can be in the conversation, but it has to be tethered to the other 3 main points, including a wall.
Hogan Gidley, always good to see you, sir. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Jake. Anytime.
So can Republicans and Democrats find any middle ground and come up with a long-term solution on immigration? We have much more to talk about. Stay with us. Days of this standoff this afternoon, an agreement was reached between Senate Republican and Democratic leaders to reopen the government, though only for 2.5 weeks. Here is what Senate